Sokka frowned as they pulled the ship to shore, surprised there was not, in fact, a grumpy firebender waiting for them. Still, he forced the thought from his mind, focused on Bato as the man stepped forward, pride in his deep blue eyes. It was like being home again. He felt like he could barely breathe as Bato placed the mark of the wise on his forehead. It was the same mark as his father had obtained. He felt like he could burst, pride and joy and rightness surging through him in a way that hadn't in years. He barely paid attention as Katara and Aang received their own marks, too enraptured in his own feeling of bliss. That bliss was broken when one of the nuns ran up to them. "Avatar, you have to leave!" "What do you mean?" Aang asked. "What's wrong?" Katara's eyes were wide and concerned. "One of our members was exercising our ostrich horses, and they saw 3 people on a beast coming after you. One of them was Fire Nation." "Zhao," Aang said darkly. "We have to get out of here now. Where's Zuko?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know. I haven't seen your companion in a long time, but you have no time to waste. I do not know who these people are, but they seem dangerous. They already have one prisoner, a man in a mask." All 3 children held sharply. Sokka cursed. Of course, they leave Zuko alone for 5 minutes. He should have known. The last time the firebender was unsupervised, he snuck into a stronghold by himself. Why shouldn't Sokka assume he would do something just as stupid this time? "That's Zuko. We can't just leave him," Aang said, panicked gray eyes blown wide. "We won't," Sokka promised grimly. "Sokka!" Katara began. "No. I let you convince me to keep him off the ship, but you can't actually tell me what you think is right to leave him with Zhao." "Of course not," the girl responded sharply. "But we don't know where they are." "We don't have to. They're after us. They'll be wherever we go. We need to use this, set a trap somehow." Bato nodded, eyes shining. "The mark of the wise. What is the plan?" Sokka's eyes screwed up. "Okay. So it's probably Zhao and some lackey or one of those kimono rhino things. So..." "It's not a kimono rhino. A beast called a shishu," the nun interrupted. "Bless you," Sokka said reflectively. The woman shook her head. "A shishu. They are rare. I've never seen one in real life. But Mina is in charge of her animal care, and she was insistent. They're supposedly fantastic trackers, able to follow something across the entire planet with their scent of smell." Sokka's brow furrowed and a smile teased at his lips. He brought his hand to his chin in a thinking pose. "Sense of smell, you say?" Zuko was done being scared and back to being annoyed, which was always better than being scared and was usually just as reflective. He spent years using anger as a way to get through fear and saw no reason to stop now. With every leap the creature made, his limp body bounced slightly, sending his face smashing into the beast's sweat-soaked fur. At least it was well groomed. The creature's tongue whipped out in the air with all the sound of a moose cow whip, and Zuko worked very hard not to think about how exactly a shishu washed itself. Of course, the physical discomfort and indignity of being paralyzed took a backseat to having to listen to Zhao talk. The man was just as much of a puffed-up, arrogant bootlicker as he remembered. Only now, Zuko didn't have the farce to have a higher political status to stay the man's boring diatribe. Even if he clearly been Ozai's disappointment, it was still a better position to be in than a random captain. If Zuko had been in a position to think about bright sides to his management, never having to interact with Zhao again had been on that very short list. He had smiled at the Agni Kai. The worst part was he couldn't even complain because he couldn't risk the man hearing his voice and knowing just who was helping the Avatar. He wasn't a traitor. He wasn't. He just didn't know how he could explain that. Occasionally June would mumble something to the effect of, "Never again, Nala. I don't care if he's offering your weight in gold," or, "If I don't get a putting up with this cap trip, I'm going to sue." That helped. Unfortunately, Zhao's personality only incentivized the bounty hunter to try and push her mount faster, and Zuko could barely wiggle the tips of his fingers by the time they crashed through the door of the monastery. An empty monastery. What? Was this like in an old spirit tale where people find out the inn they stayed in had been closed for decades? Suddenly, Sokka's voice sounded over the large snuffling of the creature. Now! Zuko had a moment to acknowledge that he probably wasn't thinking very clearly. Then he couldn't think. He could only smell. Gallons upon gallons of fragrant perfume was suddenly pushed from the walls of the courtyard. Small bottles of concentrated fragrance landed directly at Nala's feet, making the creature rear back in surprise and fear, as his main sense was blinded. Zuko grunted as he fell off the back of the rearing beast, rolling several feet away. A pair of nuns appeared from somewhere, pulling him behind a pillar, as Jin was distracted, cursing at Nala. They tore off his mask before he could protest, and shoved a jar of something truly vile to his nose. He instinctively jerked away from the smell, and realized he could in fact jerk away. "Thanks," he said, already husky voice even raspier than normal as he slipped the mask back on and pulled his swords out of their sheath. He rushed back into the fray, only to find it was fairly well handled. Zhao and Aang were battling across rooftops, but as Zuko watched, the airbender literally backflipped over the captain and his burst of flame. He concluded that his swords wouldn't be much help. Nala was gone, and June collapsed and moving in a way that Zuko was unfortunately familiar with. This was something he could help out with. He knelt beside the prone woman. He would not accept any more hunts for the Avatar or his companions. The woman prone, and clearly at a disadvantage, still scoffed. "No offense, kid, but I don't think you could cover that fee." "I think you might be surprised." "Really? How much you offerin'?" she asked, smirk still in place, looking so that she could mock how insignificant his offer was. Zuko simply reached for the large bag at her side, the one embroidered with the Fire Nation insignia, and jiggled it for a moment. About this much." He couldn't but smirk under his mask. No, he was not stealing this from Act 2, Scene 3 of The Hunted Flame. "That's mine," she snarled. "Then take it from me." He may be borrowing it from it. But the situation was completely different. Jin was paralyzed, not tied to a chair, and there was no romantic subplot. She was much more Uncle's type than his. He hated that he knew that. The woman snarled, but could not move to do anything. "If you touch a single coin, I will hunt you down and—" "How? I have the necklace. You have nothing to track us with. Merchants up and down the Earth Kingdom are selling authentic Avatar belongings. Do you really think you'll ever find a genuine artifact? He's a nomad, their water tribe. A person who survived by being on week-long hunts with only what they can carry on their backs. I own nothing beyond what I'm wearing now. I leave with this. You're never going to get it back." The smirk was gone. Zuko wasn't sure he could still push, but just in case. Besides, doesn't it seem like a lot more work than the payout was worth? And that was just having to be near Zhao. The woman snorted, eyes showing something that looked like interest, that looked like respect. "Fine. You have a deal. Now give me back my cash." Zuko obediently placed the bag in her limp hand and waved one of the nuns with the gross bottle over. He pulled the mask off his face and placed it back on his belt. Sokka and Katara were still speaking with the Water Tribe man, who looked ready to leave with the pack stuffed full. Aang's battle with Zhao had apparently ended, presumably with the man being whooshed into a tree or something, considering the mutton chop general had disappeared. The Avatar hopped in front of Zuko with wide, worried eyes. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Zuko replied, rolling his neck and flexing his fingers, testing every joint just to make sure they worked. "I was so worried. I heard you had been captured by Zhao, and you'd just given me really good advice and saved me from Zhao, and I couldn't let you get captured by him after you saved me, but I wasn't sure what he would do, and—" "Aang?" Zuko interrupted to stop that. "I'm fine. You guys did something with perfume or something. It doesn't matter." Aang looked like he was about to continue, and Zuko did not want that, so he instead grabbed the necklace out of the bit of cloth he stolen from Zhao. "Here, you are using it to track us. I think it's Katara's. Why don't you give it to her?" The boy's eyes went wide, his expression soft and hopeful as his cheeks turned pink. "Really?" "Well, Well, Zuko had originally been planning to offer it to the Water Tribe girl as some sort of peace offering. His situation with his mother was somewhat more complicated, but he could still relate to her. Could try to ease her pain and let her know that they shared it. But when Aang looked like that, yeah, I think she's really excited to see it. The boy grabbed it and took off, running off to the other two teens. They were no longer talking to the Bato guy. In fact, he seemed to have completely disappeared. Bato was not a fool. He was the second in command to his chief for a reason. Reasons that went far beyond their friendship and his material progress. He noticed things. He understood things. He reacted poorly to the firebender initially, but that had been all it was, a reaction. Something ingrained in him after a lifetime of training to fight against anyone with flames in their blood, and years of actually doing it. It hadn't been personal. After the mother had taken the boy away for healing, Sokka and the Avatar both had spoken up in his favor, the former talking loudly over a huffing Katara. And yeah, he had exactly helped out with that whole part. Bringing up the necklace, forcing the girl's worst memories of the Fire Nation to the forefront of her mind, certainly hadn't done much to lessen her animosity toward the other teen. He hadn't been thinking. Even so, Bato had been fully prepared to welcome the firebender into his hut, but Zuko had never come, choosing instead to sleep alone outside. Bato hadn't liked that. He liked even less how the boy shied away from him the next morning, keeping several feet between them and starting every time the Water Tribe warrior spoke. Bato was almost worried if he had faced warriors before in battle. After all, the Fire Nation was notorious for having an appallingly low enlistment age, and for looking far younger than they truly were. He could have served for years. Though that wasn't quite right. He wasn't afraid of Katara and Sokka, who was just as Water Tribe as he. It could have been age, or familiarity, but Bato had a sense of something more. Something about him that wasn't true of the others. He wanted to set the boy at ease, at least a little, but he never had the opportunity. Sokka was the only one who could choose his crew. As a supervisor, Bato couldn't weigh in as much as he wanted to. Then Zuko saw the conflict and chose to remove himself by only proved even more that he deserved to be on the ship. But Bato had held true to the tradition and said nothing. Now here he was, extorting safety from a bounty hunter and restoring something precious to a girl who hated him. Bato was going to be silent no longer. "That was kind of you," a voice said from behind, and Zuko nearly shot out of his skin. His hands went on his swords as he whirled around to face the elder tribesman, who didn't even have the decency to pretend to be intimidated by it. "What?" "Giving Aang the necklace. That was kind of you. I know how Katara feels about you." Zuko scowled, irritated as usual by sugarcoating. "She hates me, and that wouldn't be stopped because I gave her presents." "I wonder how you got captured. To hear Aang tell of it, you could escape a closed box in on all sides." "The Avatar is too easily impressed." Zuko spat. He wasn't sure why he was being so antagonistic. Other than a fairly reasonable initial wariness, Bato hadn't done anything to Zuko. It was his eyes, looking at Zuko from the eyes of an older man, assessing and judging and considering him. It felt familiar. It felt like an echo. It felt like danger. It felt like, do whatever you can to make him leave. They were using the necklace to track them, weren't they? You fought him to get it back, for Katara. Zuko scowled, but couldn't think of a comeback. Bato nodded to himself and stepped forward, a lifted hand to Zuko's face. The Fire Nation teen reared back, terror blanking his mind as he scrambled several feet away from the man. Bato froze. The Water Tribe man's eyes flickered across his face, to his scar, and for the first time seemed to understand it was his burned arm twitch. He frowned at the understanding past his face, as though he received an answer he hadn't particularly wanted. The man swallowed uncertainly before steeling himself. He didn't mention the reaction, simply explained. After a boy becomes a man through ice dodging, he and his crew are given marks to signify the trait they exemplified in the trial. You were not invited on the voyage, but I think you earned your mark. I simply wanted to grant you what you were due." Zuko swallowed, nodded, stood straight, and did not flinch as Bato's fingers brushed his forehead. He didn't think if he was glad or not that the man didn't avoid his scar. Mark of the trusted. They may not see it yet, but you have earned it, and they will see it soon. Zuko felt an odd lump in his throat as the man placed a warm, heavy hand on his shoulder. He bowed deeply, partially in respect, partially in avoid looking the man in the eye. Nothing he saw in them seemed to be familiar. "Hey, what's going on here?" Sokka's voice asked, a stern note in the tone, as though ready to tell his family friend off for messing with the firebender. "Nothing," Zuko said, bringing a hand to wipe off the mark before it could lead to more questions. Bato clapped Sokka's shoulder. "It was good thinking with the perfume. You certainly earned your mark of the wise. Your father will be proud when I tell him." "You think so?" "I'm sure of it." Sokka beamed up at the man, and the two settled a quick moment of understanding until Appa meandered to them, Aang already on his head. Katara ran over with her necklace already firmly on her neck. It fit, in the kind of way where you never noticed a wall in the palace was empty until the perfect tapestry had been hung, and the two siblings gave the man one last hug. Zuko jumped into Appa's back and found his letter, still folded and completely untouched, laying on the supplies. He quickly grabbed it. He was still looking for Uncle, but until he had a lead, well, there were worse places to be with these kids. His own words ran through his mind. If you can't trust them, then you aren't going to be able to trust anyone. Them Batos, the mark of the trusted. They may not see it yet, but you have earned it, and they will see to it soon. That meant something. He just wasn't sure what yet. He crumpled the paper into a ball and stuffed it in his pocket. He didn't notice the look Sokka gave him, or the relief in his eyes.